Okay, this seems to be working. I was having some issues with Twitch, but I think everything is fine now. So yeah, so today we'll continue with the idea of Redux and reducers, like we did on the last session. But I like to just to look at a couple of questions I had. So one of them was around Zoom. So one was around testing reducers and Redux in general. Um, I mean, this is this is a very fair question. Now, I don't have tests in the exercise I did last time, but and I'm not going to create a new target for this. But I like to just show how you could do this if you do it. So one of them, as I told you, is the fact that reduce is um, is a pure function, right? You have the state, you have the event as inputs, and you get a new state, and that's sort of um, it's very easy to test. So you could have something like tests reducer. So this is assuming that you'd be on your testing target. You could have something like, I don't know, let expected state. Expected state being, I don't know, maybe it could be received with empty posts, I think. And now you have to pull the whole thing. Don't worry about these errors. I'll explain in a second why these errors are here. So for now, just let's just cope with them. So we could have this initial. What's going on? It's this. Did receive. So this is your expectation. Pretty much just like you'd have in a test. And then you could say, for example, okay, so if I do content view model dot reduce, and imagine that if your previous state was loading and the new one would be fetch. So in this case, sorry, it's not fetch. The event would be received. Dot received, and you'd pass empty. This would returns you the new state, and then you could just say xtt assert asserts expected state with the new state. I think it would be like this. It's either like this or it's like this. In any case, this is not problematic. Obviously, it doesn't know what xtt assert is, which is fine. We haven't imported it. The main point I like just for you guys to notice is that the state right now is not equatable. It's not particularly difficult to do so. I advise you to do so, and you probably will have to do it if you want to unit test. I don't think you need for the event. No, I don't think you need for event, but for the state, you definitely need to do it just to compare that. Given the current state, which is loading, and given that you get a received with an empty array, that your expected state would be this. So this is a trivial, let's call it a trivial test. And the reason why it's trivial is because the reducer makes it trivial, right? It's not because it's because nothing else really. And so it's very easy and it's very, let's call it cheap to do this sort of test, because the important thing with Redux is that state is only mutated in one place, which is inside the reduce, and that's it's very important. So ultimately, if you don't have a lot of time, you still want to test something, or you're doing, for example, a test project to apply for a company, and you want to put some tests, but you don't have a lot of time to dedicate to the project, which is absolutely fair. You might as well just say you might as well just test the reduce function, and that's absolutely fine. What else? So this is one. way of testing it, or at least one part of testing it. The second part is the actual loops. The loops are a bit more, not necessarily troublesome, but it's definitely a bit more work to actually test them, but not by much. So if you say something like test loop, and again, this is a pure function, so it's that by itself helps a lot, because you're not dependent on, I don't know, a singleton, you're not depending on a view, you're not depending on anything besides what you have at this point here. So you could say something like, I don't know, let me just, you can call it loop, other people call it different things, it's absolutely fine. It's just important for you to understand that you have, some people will call it just feedback, and the loop is actually the whole thing going on. But whatever. I tend to stay pragmatic about these things, and if it makes sense for me to call it loop, I'll call it loop. If for you it makes sense to call it feedback, you call it feedback and get on with it. So when using the testing the loop, so let me see what's missing. Content view model. Okay, this one is complaining. Let me just remove this for a little bit, because I think loading. Does this do anything? I think I need something like this. Do I need something like this? Now that's a good question. Do I need oh, I see, I'm having troubles because I'm using multiple content event. You happy? Yeah. Events. It's the view model when loading. That's it. Feedback. Events. Oh, I see. I see what's happening here. Actually, yeah, I see what's happening here. So the feedback is fed into the system, and actually I won't be able to do it this way. But this is still fine. You can do it in a different way. You might not be able to test the loops individually, but you're able to test the entire system, which maybe it's a better investment, because you're able to test the whole thing. Maybe. I'm not too sure. So a way to test this could be, for example, you need to look at what are the dependencies here, right? And because ultimately what you want is really to mock those dependencies, and the main dependency in here is the URL session.shared, and in particular this method, that data task publisher, that you want to that actually dictating the whole flow happening here. So independently of being able to test the feedback individually or the whole system, you'd still have to do this, which is pretty straightforward. You just have to do something like, sometimes I think I call it connectable. I call it connectable, and you can say that your connectable is actually, I can just copy the signature of the function. By the way, you can use this approach for pretty much anything that uses a URL session. This will work absolutely fine. And in this particular case, data task. In this particular case, I'm going to erase it to any publisher, because that's what I want. It's going to be data URL. I think it's actually no. Actually, I think it's fine if I put it like this. Let's see if I can do this. The second thing you'd have to do is just go to the URL session and say, hey, I want you to comply with this protocol, and you'd get it for free, because Connectable, just take this out. you'll get this for free because Connectable, because URL session already has this method, so you don't really have to do anything. Now this is the first thing you have to do, a protocol, so you can inject stuff. The second thing is actually making URL session comply with this protocol, and the third thing would be to actually create your mock or stub. So you can say, for instance, it can be a class mocked session that complies with Connectable, and you can take, how do I do this usually? I pass a result of data, URL response, and I think URL error. So this is a tuple, okay? Like this, then you do, so you're pretty much just setting up your mocked object, and just copy this here. And finally, the only thing missing here is the actual implementation, in this case of the data task publisher, and this could be done. Oh, I see what's the problem here. So the problem seems to be that, am I able to initialize this with something? No, I'm not. So this is the problem. I don't think I'm able to mock it up. This is fine. Again, this is still fine. It just forces me to go in a different route than what I wanted to. But it's all right. So this is cool. You can pretty much do this, right? You can do just this, and then you do self data task, and one you want is this with URL, and then you erase to any publisher. I'm just not sure if the compiler is smart enough to pick up the right. It should be, right? It should be. Now these things is still complaining about other stuff that I have here, but that's fine. I'll explain in a second why this is going crazy over here. So now that you have your mocked here, where is it? Yeah, here. Now you can come here. You put this, and then you return your result dot publisher, and then you erase to any publisher. And that's it. Like, you are now able to mock your URL session. You can pass this around to your dependencies, and even if you're not using Redux or Reduce, this is a pretty decent code that you can use in your tests. But going back to our example, what you'd want now is saying, for instance, okay, instead of URL session, what I want is a connectable. I can still do this just for convenience, right? But ultimately you can pass a connectable here. This is annoying me a little bit. No, it's fine. That's fine. I'll cope with it. Now, because I don't think you're able to play around with the feedback directly. Yeah, I don't think you're able to poke it directly. Maybe you can, but I'm just not seeing how. Okay, so you have just this is fine. This is all right. Okay, let's just leave this for a little bit. You have to keep injecting stuff. I actually can leave the convenience here, and I can just remove it over here. And you have to pass. Okay, so this is not a section; it's actually connectable now. Connectable here, connectable here, and this is just for a second. I think if I remove them from the target, yeah, I can actually just remove them from the target, and it should compile. You happy? Maybe. Oh no, it's not happy because I moved it for a little bit here. Put it back here. You happy now? Nope. Okay, but this is a different reason. Content view model. Yep, this is fine. You happy now? Nope. I can keep using the widget. Just, I think I'm having an issue actually with my screen. Am I? Maybe not. Maybe not. No, I don't think I am. Is it coping now? Nope, still not. It doesn't know what the session is. It does know what this is, what the connectable is. Type of expression is ambiguous. Why is it ambiguous? Why is it ambiguous? Is it because of this? Maybe? No? So if I do map, yeah, if I do map, it works. So the problem is not here. The problem is somewhere else. Let me just remove this for a little bit. Let me see if I have other warnings in other places. I do. No, this is not even part of the. Okay, let me just clean the project. We try to run it. In theory, should I have only one? Yeah, which is this one. Okay. Okay, core error dot network to posts. Why is it ambiguous? You always have to go one by one, and so a good way to debug this sort of situation is you go one by one, you're commenting them out, and until you find the culprit, and you say something like return empty and erase to any publisher. Yep, and you just go one by one. Aha, I know why this is failing. You'd be happy with a 0, wouldn't you? Yes, I know why it's complaining. This is fine. I know what's happening. The problem is that the tuples are not labeled, so this guy is going crazy. But if I'm not too sure if I can label them. Can I? Can I label them like this here? Because if I can, then this is solved. I have to fix this. Oh, come on. If this and this and to return what? Oh, this is fine. I mean, I'm not. This, I'm not even going to bother with this. For now, this is all right. This is all right for the point I'm trying to make. Maybe not in general, but for the point I'm trying to make. So, okay. So now that, so now you're at the point where you can actually mock the entire content view model. You can play around because you are in full control of the connectable. So a way to test this would be, for instance, say, okay, I have a session that is a mocked session, and you pass a failure. How do I initialize this? What is the code? Oh, this is nice. Okay, I'll put this just for the sake of it. And then you can say view model equal, I don't know, content view model dot init, you pass the session, And a way to test this would be, for instance, to say, okay, is XTC assert that the view model dot state dot okay, I have to actually get inside of it. That's all right. I'm not too sure if we have a test scheduler available in Combine. I'm not too sure. I know that Michael created one, but I mean, the only thing this forces to do is you have to test this as if it was an asynchronous call, which is fine. I mean, it's what you'd use anyway. For testing asynchronous code, which is with the expectations, then you have wait, then you have expectation.fulfill. So you go around with that dance. And you'd say, for example, okay, so I can start by asserting that this, which is my that is my state, equals to, for example, initial. So this is an assert that you could do, right? This is something that you could do just to sort of say, okay, yeah, I know you don't know. So this is something that you could do just to sort of test the initial status of the view model. You could then say, for example, view model dot send fetch, and you'd assert that the state now equals to dot failure. Sorry, not failure. It's failed. Yeah, failed. And in order to reuse this error, let me just take this out. Let error just to make it easier. You can then assert. Where is it? You can then assert that the error would be, if I'm not mistaken, a .network error. Yeah? Failed error. The error in this case is a core error, so you still need to double wrap. It's the cat doing. Jesus Christ. So you have to wrap it again, and yeah, it's complaining again. It's complaining because there's no equatable, but in essence, this is a for this particular implementation of Redux, this is a way to test it. So you test the view model, you test as well here. Sorry, you test here as well that the machine is actually working, and you pretty much. Yeah, you pretty much cover a lot of you cover a lot of ground just with these sort of two tests. Obviously, you then would mock it with a success and see how that goes. And yeah, this is a good way to test it. So moving on to the second piece, how to use Redux in a code base. This is a tricky question because I hate answering questions with depends, but this. This is really one of those questions that it really depends on what is the status of your code base. And I think a good way to start is to say, okay, am I able to test? Is my code testable? Not necessarily that your code base has tests, but are you able to sort of inject stuff? Are you able to, do you have things in modules? Do you have, can I look at your code base and clearly see the layers? If this is, if it's yes for these questions, then it's probably in a good place for us to start moving around some of these pieces into actual loops and or feedbacks, whatever you want to call it, into actual feedbacks. Actually, this is actually starting to bother me. I don't think it's a loop. I think it's a feedback. Yeah, I think this is not loop. Loop is the entire system. The entire system has a single loop, and I'm passing feedbacks inside the loop. I'm pretty sure that I'm saying... I'm pretty sure this is not feedback. This should be a feedback. But it looks cooler if I put loop. So I don't know. It looks cooler if I put just loop. So yeah, it will vastly depend on how your code base is. If you don't really know Reactive Swift, RX. If you haven't used any of that, jumping to this sort of to a code base that uses CombineFeedback, I think it's a pretty big jump unless you have someone in the team that is able to sort of help you to go through this. Yeah, it will vastly depends what is the status of your code base. There's yeah, so there's a third question that I just recalled, which was, and this goes back to the point free episodes. If you look at some of my tweets and the point free itself, if you've been looking at, I've been sort of asking them, hey guys, when are we going to talk about side effects? When are you guys going to introduce that so we can see how you guys doing it? And for people that sort of have used this library, they're like, okay, this question makes sense. But for people that never used anything like that, they're like, what the fuck does that mean, right? What do you mean by side effects? So in this sort of, and to explain that, I sort of have to go back a little bit, and it sort of touches on the reason why you actually need a CombineFeedback or a third-party library to actually implement all this thing, right? Because Redux, at its essence, it's a very simple concept. It's as simple. Let me show you. So imagine that you don't for instance, you don't do network requests, you don't store stuff to disk. So imagine you have a calculator, for example, right? So you have a calculator, and I don't know, you have your, I don't know, you have, let me see, you have an event called operations. I think it'd be operations. Again, I'm doing this from the top of my head, so if I screw this up, you have add, you have subtract, and that's it. You then have I think you have, and this is a good example where you'd use a struct instead of an actual enum, and you have a struct called state, and you have a variable which is the current value, int, and then finally you have your function, your reduce function, your reduce function, right? You have your reduce function. You have the new state. Actually, I don't think you would even need this. I don't think you'd need this. No, you need this. So this is the current state. This is the event. Again, this exercise is really bring us back to the roots. Like, what the hell is this thing, right? And you have the state, and then you have a variable that is private. You have your variable that is your state. So it's a current state. Actually, this is not. The set is private, but the variable is visible outside. So this is fine. And then you would have something like, I don't know, you have your initializer, which is the initial value, which is an int, and you'd say, okay, self dot state equals to state, and you'd pass, for example, 0. And you have this, this is an event, and what is happening here is pretty simple. So if you get an event, right, if you get an event at it's an add, then what you're going to do is you're going to return the state dot current value plus 1. So let's assume that add it's, I mean, we could come here and just put an int and do the proper operations, but let's suppose that we're very basic and we just have this, and then you wrap the whole thing around, right? You just wrap it around, you just wrap this thing around, and you can call it current value, and it will be the same thing for subtract, right? So you have subtract, and you do this, and finally the only piece missing really is the send action, right? or how does Combine calls it? Sorry, CombineFeedback. It calls it action. Yeah, ActionFor. So you'd have exactly the same thing. You have exactly the same thing as action for event, and it doesn't do anything. And the only thing it does is new state. So you'd call the reduce. You'd pass the state. So your current state. You'd pass event. You'd pass the event, and you'd say self dot state equals new state. All right. Yeah. Okay. This what is happening here? It shouldn't be. Oh, sorry. This can be a class. This is fine. We don't need this. This actually should be a class because when you pass around your calculator, you want reference semantics. You don't want value semantics. So it makes sense to have a class. So this is Redux. Like this is, you don't need anything whatsoever. You don't need any of this stuff. You can remove this. You can right now use this sort of stuff in your code base. Now, why the hell are we using this stuff, right? Why are we going around and looking on GitHub for these fancy things and using them? Well, the reason why is because you with this implementation, you really have, you can do it yourself, right? It's completely fine, but you're not able to deal with asynchronous events, right? You're only able to deal with stuff that is synchronous, right? If you send an event that is adding a number, that's it. You add something, you mutate the state on the place and you reset it, and that's it. But if you want to deal with something that takes time, so for example, network request, how do you deal with that? How do you wait for this value to come back and update the state? And how do you go about that? How do you queue events? So for example, if I don't know, if for some reason I'm doing something, I'm clicking the button and I'm starting all these new requests to the network, how do you deal with that? And this is sort of why CombineFeedback and other libraries out there, that's really their purpose. That's what they do. They don't do anything else than this. They set this sort of infrastructure around your code that allows you to do all these things. For example, it's able to say, okay, so you start a network request and a new one comes. Okay, I'm gonna cancel the first one. I'm gonna use this new one. So this is something that you get this for free, right? And if you'd had to deal with that on your own, I mean, there's a good chance you're gonna screw this up. It's not because you're not capable of doing it. I'm certainly talking about myself. It's not that I'm incapable of doing it. It's more that most likely I'll get it wrong, and it's gonna take some time to actually get this right and have the behavior I want. So this is one of the reasons that you'd use CombineFeedback or anything else out there. And I guess the reason why I tweet at the guys of Point Free is, when are you going to show us how you do side effects? That's really the question. And how do you deal with these situations where you have to send a request and you have to wait for it to update the state? How do you deal with a concurrent request? So you have multiple parts of your app trying to change the state. How do you queue this stuff? How do you deal with that? How do you make sure that the entity that's observing the calculator in this case actually receive these events on the main thread, right? Because typically when you're observing the state, you are interested in it on the UI level because you want to change something, you want to re-render something. So this is really this is sort of the questions that this sort of answers the question, why do we actually need to use these third-party libraries? Why I keep asking the guys from Point Free, when are you going to have the episode about when you're going to introduce side effects? And that's why, if you look at their implementation right now, so they've been doing this, I think, for 7 episodes now. They haven't introduced any side effects, right? Everything is synchronous. Everything looks pretty neat, pretty tidy. It's very simple code. I mean, there's a lot of composition. There's a lot of functional aspects that sort of binds, not binds, but bends your mind, and it might be a bit difficult to grasp. But in essence, the reducer and their approach to it is quite simple at this point, until we actually get to side effects, which is what, I don't know, maybe 99% of the apps out there use. And I guess I wanted to talk a bit another library that I've been using, and this is sort of the reason why I'm having all those errors. But I ran out of time. So that's it. Thank you very much.